Welcome to the Pro Ticker Deep Dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
Yeah, and it is early March 2026, and the geopolitical tectonic plates that you probably thought were relatively stable just a few days ago, they have completely fractured.
Fractured is the right word.
We are waking up to an entirely different global architecture today. So our objective here is straightforward. We need to systematically break down a multifaceted, truly unprecedented geopolitical and economic earthquake.
Right.
I am talking about the sudden, all-out kinetic conflict that has erupted overnight between the United States, Israel, and Iran.
It's hard to even process the velocity of it all.
Exactly. Okay, so let's unpack this. Because the sheer scale of the current theater of operations is staggering. We're talking over 2,000 military targets struck in a matter of hours.
2,000.
The absolute apex of an entire nation's military and political leadership effectively vaporized in a coordinated decapitation strike. Global shipping through Hormuz, which is arguably the most critical maritime choke point on Earth, completely paralyzed.
And the markets are reacting exactly how you'd expect.
Yeah, the financial markets are tearing up their models. They're spinning into this ferocious safe haven frenzy. Spot gold casually shattered the $5,350 mark.
When you look at the terminal velocity of these developments, it's clear this isn't just another regional flare-up.
No, not at all.
The shockwaves from this specific operational theater are radiating outward at lightning speed. They are instantly repricing global risk across every single asset class.
So where are we seeing that hit hardest right now?
Everywhere. It's hitting the sovereign bond markets, it's hitting the Shanghai Containerized Freight Index, and look, it's absolutely going to hit the downstream consumer economy in a matter of weeks. We're essentially watching the real-time stress testing of the entire interconnected global system.
And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive right now. You've already seen the chaotic headlines, you've gotten the flood of breaking alerts on your phone.
Right, the noise is deafening.
So we are going to bypass that noise. We're digging into the actual mechanics of what is happening. We're going to look at the tactical realities of the air campaign, the incredibly sophisticated cyber operations suffocating Tehran right now, the regional backlash, the hard math of the supply chain, and finally, how institutional capital is aggressively repositioning itself.
That's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. Let's start with the ground truth of the tactical landscape.
The kinetic side.
Exactly. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a massive joint multi-domain military campaign against Iran.
A joint campaign.
Right. We're looking at over 2,000 targets hit. And they achieved something that defense analysts have, debated the feasibility of for decades.
Full uncontested air superiority.
Full uncontested air superiority over Tehran. But the focal point here is the decapitation campaign.
Yeah, that's the crux of this initial strike.
The confirmed casualties at the top of the command structure are staggering. Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
Dead.
Former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad.
Also confirmed.
Armed Forces General Staff Chief Major General Abdul Rahim Musavi, along with an entire roster of critical logistical and operational IRGC commanders.
The term decapitation gets thrown around a lot in theoretical wargaming.
Sure.
But actually executing it on this scale against a deeply entrenched theocratic and military apparatus, that is historically rare.
What does that actually do to a military that size?
When you surgically remove the apex of that command structure, you aren't just degrading their operational capacity, you're inducing an immediate systemic paralysis.
Because they don't know who's giving the orders.
Exactly. The entire Iranian command doctrine relies on highly centralized authority. It relies on unwavering personal loyalty to the supreme leader. When that central node is suddenly gone, the entire nervous system of the military just fragments.
I want to dig into how they actually achieve this, because the division of labor between the U.S. and Israeli forces is fascinating.
It was very clearly delineated.
It seems like they explicitly carved up the target packages based on very specific operational strengths.
They did. It's a highly optimized strike package. Israel aggressively prioritized the immediate existential threats to their own soil.
Meaning the leadership and the missiles.
Right. Neutralizing the top-tier leadership and systematically dismantling the ballistic missile launch infrastructure, they focused on the forward deployed threat matrix.
The U.S.
The United States took on the heavy strategic lifting. U.S. forces dismantled the integrated air defense grids, they crippled the naval assets, and they handled the deep, hardened installations that require very specific munitions capabilities.
Let's talk about those deep installations. Because we're looking at facilities like the Imam Hussein Missile Base and the Amman Missile Base.
These aren't just regular bunkers.
Right, they are subterranean complexes carved directly into mountainsides. I was looking at the logistics of penetrating these sites, and the U.S. deployed B-2 stealth bombers for this.
They had to.
Walk me through the mechanics of that. Taking out an underground base requires a very specific kinetic profile, doesn't it?
It requires extreme specialized hardware. Specifically, you're looking at the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, the MOP.
How big is that?
We're talking about a 30,000-pound precision-guided weapon.
Wow.
And the B-2 Spirit is essentially the only platform capable of delivering it effectively in a contested environment. The physics of it are just incredible.
How deep can it go?
These munitions are designed to penetrate up to 200 feet of reinforced concrete or solid granite.
200 feet?
Right. Before a delayed fuse actually triggers the detonation. The fact that U.S. forces operated B-2s completely undetected over Iranian airspace to deliver these payloads, it highlights a severe technological overmatch.
It changes the whole strategic calculus.
It renders the concept of subterranean invulnerability completely obsolete overnight.
That's a staggering show of force. And it wasn't just in the air or under the mountains, right? The naval campaign was brutal.
Utterly systematic.
The U.S. essentially erased the operational capacity of the Iranian Navy in a few days. We've got confirmation on the sinking of several key surface combatants, the frigates Bayandor and Nagdi.
And significantly, the IRGC's frigate.
The Jamaran.
Yes.
U.S. President Donald Trump announced 9 Iranian naval vessels sunk total, and the naval headquarters, quote-unquote, largely destroyed. But why focus so heavily on sinking these specific frigates, rather than just, say, blockading the ports?
Because vessels like the Jamaran function as the command and control nodes.
For the asymmetric strategy.
Precisely. The IRGC Navy relies heavily on fast attack craft and swarm tactics. Without those larger frigates to coordinate the swarm, to provide over-the-horizon radar data, and to act as mobile communication hubs.
The swarm is useless.
The fast attack boats are effectively blind. They're uncoordinated. By sinking the command ships, the U.S. didn't just remove a few holes from the water. They fundamentally dismantled the IRGC's ability to execute complex naval maneuvers in the Gulf.
Which brings up the ultimate strategic objective here. This clearly isn't a proportional deterrence operation anymore.
No, we are way past proportionality.
The stated goals now explicitly include regime change and the complete dismantling of the nuclear infrastructure.
Right.
Though it's interesting to note that while the IDS claims they are systematically dismantling the enrichment sites, they haven't touched the Tehran research reactor.
That is a calculated restraint.
Right.
You target the underground centrifuge cascades, places like Natanz or Fordo, because that's where the weapons-grade enrichment happens. Striking a functional, active research reactor within a major population center like Tehran carries massive radiological fallout risks.
So it's about avoiding mass civilian casualties.
It's a line they haven't crossed yet. Likely to maintain some degree of international diplomatic cover and avoid triggering a mass casualty event, but the overarching intent is undeniable. They are taking the Iranian nuclear program offline permanently.
So let's look at the internal situation. If the leadership is gone, the military command structure is shattered, the key assets are burning, what does this look like on the ground?
Chaos. Absolute chaos.
How does a nation of that size even function? Because it's not just a kinetic bombardment. The regime has essentially triggered an internal dark age.
The internet blackout.
Yes, they've imposed a nationwide internet blackout. And they are throttling connectivity down to exactly 1%.
That 1% figure is incredibly telling.
How so?
Because it's not a complete severing of the physical fiber cables. It's an aggressive manipulation of BGP routing and ISP-level throttling.
So they are choosing who gets access.
Exactly. They are deliberately whitelisting critical state and military intranets while blackholing virtually all civilian DNS requests.
Why leave 1% on?
Because the state still needs to communicate with its surviving units, but it's a desperate measure to blind the populace, to prevent any kind of coordinated civilian uprising, and to stop the dissemination of internal footage to the outside world.
It's a dual-front war for survival, then.
It is.
The remnants of the regime are absorbing a multi-domain assault from 2 highly advanced militaries externally, while simultaneously treating their own population as a hostile force internally.
Which requires immense resources.
We're seeing law enforcement command checkpoints being rapidly thrown up across Tehran, and the Baasi's paramilitaries are staging these highly orchestrated, almost surreal anti-U.S. protests at the universities.
just to project some illusion of control.
Exactly, an illusion, because the internal pressure is immense. And this is where the U.S. and Israel executed a psychological operation that is frankly unprecedented.
The cyber component.
Yes, the cyber operation.
Yeah.
This part completely blew my mind. If the network is throttled to 1%, how do you reach the civilian population?
You have to get creative.
U.S. and Israeli cyber commands didn't just deface state news sites. They managed to infiltrate a highly common, everyday religious calendar and prayer app used by millions of Iranians. They bypassed the throttled state media networks entirely and pushed a direct broadcast to people's phones. The message said, "It's time for reckoning," and urged Iranian security forces to lay down their arms.
Think about the psychological impact of that.
Seriously, imagine you are an Iranian citizen or a low-level IRGC conscript right now. Your command structure is dead. The sky is full of stealth bombers. You can't load a basic web page to see if your family in the next province is alive.
You have zero outside information.
Right, but you open your local prayer app, and sitting right there on the screen is a highly targeted, localized military warning from the U.S. and Israel. How is that even technically possible on a throttled network?
It suggests a deeply embedded supply chain attack.
Meaning they were in the system for a while.
Oh, likely months, perhaps years. They compromised the server infrastructure or the content delivery networks hosting that specific app well in advance, and they just waited for the exact right moment to execute the payload.
And because it's a domestic app,
Because the app is locally hosted and likely whitelisted by the regime's own firewalls as a safe domestic application, the push notifications slip right past that nationwide throttling.
that is brilliant.
It's brilliant from a cyber warfare perspective, but the psychological damage to the regime is even more profound. If your encrypted state networks and your state-approved religious apps are totally compromised, paranoia just consumes the remaining leadership. You can't trust your own screens.
And speaking of that remaining leadership, there's a massive political vacuum right now. Who actually steps in when the supreme leader is eliminated so abruptly?
We're seeing a temporary leadership council form.
Who is on it?
You've got Ali Reza Rafi. He's a deeply entrenched insider who managed Khamenei's religious authority for years. He's sitting alongside President Pezeshkian and Judiciary Chief EJ.
And I saw some other familiar names popping up.
Yes, figures like Ali Larijani and Parliament Speaker Mohammed Bagher Ghalibaf are trying to step up.
Is it a stable group?
Not at all. It's a highly fragile coalition of pragmatists, hardline clerics, and IRGC remnants. The core problem is that none of these figures possess the absolute, unquestioned theological and constitutional authority that Khamenei wielded.
There's no clear successor.
Right. Larijani and Ghalibaf have long-standing rivalries. Pezeshkian is technically the executive, but the real power always resided with the supreme leader and the Revolutionary Guard.
So they're putting on a brave face.
They are trying to project continuity. But behind closed doors, it's highly likely we are seeing a brutal, frantic scramble for control over whatever military assets and internal security apparatus are left.
But how long can that makeshift council realistically hold the country together while sustaining a 99% internet blackout? I mean, you can't process interbank transfers. You can't run modern hospital logistics. You can't manage a national supply chain on a 1% connection.
You can't. It is absolute economic asphyxiation.
So they're destroying their own economy.
They are trading their long-term economic survival for short-term regime preservation. Every single day that the commercial internet remains dark, the foundational economy of Iran degrades further. But if they lift the blackout, the civilian protests will likely overwhelm the fractured security forces.
It's an impossible bind.
Truly impossible.
So with internal command completely fractured and their domestic economy suffocating, we need to look at how they are actually fighting back, because they are fighting back.
They are, but not in the way most expected.
Right. The retaliation hasn't looked the way the war games predicted. I fully expected to see massive, overwhelming ballistic missile barrages aimed straight at Tel Aviv. But we've only registered 4 distinct barrages recently.
4 out of an arsenal of thousands.
That's a fraction of their theoretical launch capacity. Why so few?
It heavily validates the effectiveness of those initial Israeli strikes on the ballistic missile infrastructure, combined with that command and control breakdown we talked about.
So they literally can't fire them.
Exactly. Without top-tier generals to coordinate the timing and trajectory of a massive synchronized missile swarm, and with many of the physical launch sites turned into smoking craters, they've been forced to pivot.
And what's the pivot?
Horizontal escalation. They are deliberately internationalizing the battlefield.
Meaning they've pivoted away from Israel and are aiming directly at their Gulf neighbors.
Yes.
We're seeing massive drone swarms targeting the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman, and the volume of these attacks is relentless.
The interception numbers are wild.
They really are. The UAE alone has intercepted over 541 drones. Kuwait has pulled down 283. Walk me through the mechanics and the strategy here. Why target the Gulf states with drones instead of whatever missiles they have left?
They are relying on low, slow-flying, loitering munitions, likely variants of the Shahin 136.
The same ones used in other conflicts recently.
Exactly. These are relatively cheap to produce. They are easy to launch from dispersed mobile platforms. You don't need a centralized command node to fire off a Shaheed. And critically, they force the adversary to expend highly expensive, sophisticated interceptors like Patriot or AJAD missiles to shoot them down.
Trading a $20,000 drone for a $3 million missile.
The math heavily favors the attacker. The strategy is brutal but calculated. By saturating the airspace of the UAE and Kuwait, Iran is actively trying to impose an unacceptable economic and security cost on U.S. allies in the region.
Make the allies feel the pain.
Exactly. The logic is that if Dubai and Abu Dhabi feel enough pain, if their airspace is closed and their infrastructure threatened, they will bypass standard diplomatic channels and put immense frantic pressure on Washington
Will halt the strikes.
to force a ceasefire. Iran is essentially using the economic vulnerability of the Gulf as a human shield against the U.S. air campaign.
And this strategy isn't without real costs. It's not just drones being shot down over empty desert. We've seen 3 U.S. service members killed at Camp Arif's, John, in Kuwait.
A direct hit.
We had drones strike alarmingly close to the Israeli embassy in Abu Dhabi. It feels like we are right on the edge of drawing the entire Arab bloc into a direct kinetic war.
The risk of regional contagion is at its absolute maximum right now.
Because what happens if a drone slips through?
That's the terrifying question. Will Saudi Arabia, whose crown prince reportedly urged the U.S. to take decisive action in the first place, decide to retaliate directly if a drone slips through their defenses and hits a desalination plant or an Aramco facility?
Or what if the UAE launches their own F-16?
Right. We're teetering on the edge of a conflict that involves not just proxies, but the sovereign militaries of the major Arab states.
Speaking of proxies, the axis of resistance seems incredibly disjointed right now.
Highly fragmented.
Hezbollah officially broke the November 2024 ceasefire, firing rockets into northern Israel. In Iraq, you've got Harkat Hezbollah al-Nujaba launching attacks on U.S. positions in Erbil and actively clashing with local security forces near the U.S. embassy in Baghdad.
That's expected.
But then you look south to Yemen, and the Houthis, who were the primary disruptors of Red Sea shipping just a few years ago, have remained surprisingly inactive. Why is this proxy network responding so unevenly?
Because the connective tissue of that network has been severed.
The Quds force.
Exactly. The Iranian Foreign Affairs Minister essentially admitted this publicly when he stated that military units are currently independent and isolated. The IRGC Quds Force historically funded, armed, and coordinated these disparate militias, but they lost their top operational commanders in the decapitation strikes.
So they don't have anyone telling them what to do.
Without Tehran dictating the tempo and providing real-time intelligence, these groups are falling back on localized, opportunistic attacks. As for the Houthis, they may be dealing with internal Saudi pressure, or they simply lack the immediate green light and logistical resupply from Tehran to initiate a broader campaign right now.
But let's bring it back to the Gulf, because the Gulf isn't just a military theater, it is the central artery of the global economy.
The most important choke point on Earth.
By targeting the UAE and Oman, Iran is hitting the commercial jugular. We're seeing direct strikes on critical commercial infrastructure, Zayed Port in Abu Dhabi, Jebel Ali Port in Dubai, and Duqm Port in Oman.
And Jebel Ali is a massive target.
Right, it's not just a commercial hub, it's the largest U.S. Navy port of call outside the United States. And because of this threat, the Strait of Hormuz is effectively paralyzed.
We really cannot overstate the gravity of that paralysis.
Break the math down for me.
If you look at the macro layout of global energy transit, roughly 20% of the world's total crude oil consumption flows through that narrow 21-mile wide choke point, along with a massive portion of seaborne natural gas.
And traffic has plummeted.
Commercial vessel traffic has dropped by 70%. The major global shipping conglomerates aren't just delaying, they are actively suspending cargo bookings for the entire region.
Because it's too dangerous.
The maritime insurance markets, like Lloyd's of London, have likely spiked their war risk premiums to levels that make transit economically unviable. Even if a ship captain was brave enough to attempt it, the insurance costs alone stopped the ships.
I was looking at the maritime tracking data earlier today. The visual is just staggering. There are approximately 170 massive container ships currently holding position, just idling in the water.
Waiting for a resolution that isn't coming anytime soon.
That represents roughly 450,000 TEUs of capacity, completely removed from the global rotation. What does that kind of sudden capacity drain do to the broader supply chain?
It triggers an immediate and violent bullwhip effect.
Explain that.
When 450,000 TEUs of capacity are trapped at anchor, it doesn't just delay the goods on those specific ships, it means those ships aren't returning to Asia to pick up the next load.
A cascading failure.
Exactly. We'll see the Shanghai Containerized Freight Index absolutely explode in the coming days as exporters scramble for the remaining available hull space. You'll see massive alternative routing via the Cape of Good Hope,
Going all the way around Africa.
which adds weeks to transit times. It burns massive amounts of additional bunker fuel, and it entirely throws off the just-in-time manufacturing schedules for factories in Europe and North America.
And the energy markets reacted exactly how you'd expect to Hormuz's shutdown, though the velocity of the move was breathtaking. We saw Brent crude and WTI immediately jump 6 to 8%.
Straight up.
The futures pushed past $83 and $77 a barrel, respectively. Now, we've historically seen higher absolute oil prices, but it's the speed of the repricing and the underlying panic that stands out here. Plus, European and Asian natural gas benchmarks spiked nearly 40%.
The absolute price of WTI at $77 might not seem historically catastrophic on its face, but you have to look at the term structure of the futures curve.
What does that tell us?
When you have an instantaneous shock like this, the market moves into aggressive backwardation.
Meaning the near term is more expensive.
Exactly. The premium for immediate physical delivery of oil skyrockets compared to contracts further out in time. Refineries panic. They need supply today. And a 40% spike in natural gas benchmarks isn't just a number on a screen. It fundamentally alters the unit economics of chemical manufacturing and heavy industry in Europe almost overnight.
Which puts China in an incredibly complex geopolitical bind. China is the world's largest energy importer, and they are reportedly pressing Iran very hard to avoid totally closing the strait.
They have to. They are heavily reliant on Qatari LNG shipments that have to pass through Hormuz.
It's a fascinating dynamic. You have Iran's most crucial strategic and economic ally essentially begging Tehran not to fully deploy the only geographic weapon they have left.
It perfectly illustrates the hard limits of ideological alliances when they crash into vital macroeconomic interests. China's domestic economy cannot sustain a prolonged energy shock right now. They need that Qatari LNG.
So if Iran shuts it down anyway,
If Iran fully mines the strait or starts sinking Chinese-bound tankers, that strategic partnership evaporates. The question is whether the decentralized, surviving elements of the IRGC even care about Beijing's diplomatic pressure at this point.
they might just be fighting to survive.
Right. They might be entirely focused on short-term tactical survival over long-term alliances.
So if Hormuz stays closed, does the U.S. Navy eventually have to step in and provide armed escorts for every single commercial tanker moving through the strait? The logistical strain of coordinating convoys under the constant threat of drone swarms and anti-ship missiles would be immense.
Operation Earnest Will in the late 1980s is the historical precedent for that. But the threat matrix today, with sophisticated loitering munitions and advanced anti-ship cruise missiles, is infinitely more complex.
If they do it.
The U.S. Navy can absolutely keep the sea lanes open, but the cost in hardware, operational tempo, and risk to surface combatants would be extraordinary.
And all this friction on the water immediately translated into extreme volatility on the trading floors. We saw global equity markets take a sharp dive right out of the gate. The S&P 500, the Dow, the NASDAQ, all dropped near 2% initially.
Before engaging in that wild, volatile seesaw action.
Exactly. But the internal rotation under the hood of the major indices was brutal. Big tech, the Magnificent Seven, stocks like Nvidia and Apple got hit hard. Travel stocks and airlines were hammered, obviously, because of the immediate recalculation of jet fuel costs
What you're seeing is the instantaneous liquidation of risk-on assets.
to free up capital.
Yes, to free up capital for defensive posturing. The market was priced for a relatively stable macroeconomic environment, and it had to violently reprice for systemic geopolitical risk.
And that capital flight to safety triggered the safe haven surge.
Right.
The demand for true hard assets and sovereign backing was off the charts. We saw gold completely detached from its recent trading ranges, smashing historical records, breaking the $5,350 mark.
Incredible move.
The U.S. dollar index, the DXY, strengthened as global capital sought the liquidity of the reserve currency. Treasury yields spiked, with the 10-year note hitting 4.1%, and the VIX spiked over 21%.
The fear gauge.
Right. But I want to focus on the VIX for a second, because a 21% handle isn't end-of-the-world territory.
Yeah.
But the internal dynamics are telling, right?
Very telling. A VIX at 21 implies elevated volatility, but what institutional traders watch closely during events like this is the VIX term structure.
Similar to the oil backwardation.
Precisely. When short-term volatility futures price higher than longer-term contracts, that state of backwardation, it signals acute, immediate panic. The market is paying massive premiums for downside protection right now, today, rather than hedging for a month out.
Now, amid all this flight to safety, there was one glaring failure that completely upended a major financial narrative. Bitcoin fell. It didn't hold its value. It didn't surge alongside gold. It dropped. We've heard for years that Bitcoin is digital gold, a non-sovereign hedge against this exact type of geopolitical instability and fiat system shock. So why, the second the missiles actually started flying, did institutional money dump it? Is it a liquidity issue, or does the market just fundamentally view it differently than physical gold?
It's a brutal reality check for the digital gold thesis. During acute systemic shocks, correlation goes to 1.
Meaning everything moves together.
Right. When massive macro hedge funds get margin calls on their broader portfolios, they don't sell what they want to sell. They sell what they can sell.
And Bitcoin is always open.
Exactly. It trades 247 and is highly liquid, making it a prime candidate for immediate liquidation to raise cash. Furthermore, despite the underlying philosophy of its creators, the institutional capital that has flooded into crypto over the last few years clearly still treats it as a high-beta, risk-on technology asset.
Not a safe haven.
No. When the world catches fire, capital retreats to the oldest, most proven stores of value: physical gold and U.S. government debt.
Meanwhile, a different sector is seeing massive capital inflows. Let's talk about the defense boom.
The prime contractors.
Yes, companies like Lockheed Martin and RTX surged to hit 52-week highs instantly. And there's a historical precedent here, right? We often see PE multiple expansion for prime contractors during the onset of kinetic conflicts because the market starts pricing in the replenishment cycles.
It's the cold calculus of modern warfare.
Expendable munitions.
Exactly. When you launch a multi-day campaign utilizing thousands of precision-guided munitions, Tomahawk cruise missiles, and GBU-57s, those stockpiles are depleted. The market immediately models the future Department of Defense procurement contracts required to rebuild those arsenals.
The orders are guaranteed to come in.
Right. The revenue visibility for companies like Lockheed and RTX suddenly extends out for years, which justifies the immediate surge in their equity valuation.
Which brings us to a phenomenon that is generating a massive amount of scrutiny right now. There are confirmed reports showing that members of the U.S. Congress were actively positioned in these exact defense stocks right before the conflict erupted.
It's controversial, to say the least.
They are generating significant returns on the surge in these aerospace and defense equities as the military campaign unfolds. And we're just observing the mechanics of the market here, but the timing and the information asymmetry are hard to ignore.
It highlights a deeply entrenched alignment between capital markets and national security policy.
You have lawmakers who sit on intelligence and armed services committees, who receive classified briefings on force posture and geopolitical strategy, holding portfolios heavily weighted toward military contractors right before a massive strike.
In the institutional trading world, there's a concept known as the Texas hedge.
Instead of buying an asset to offset a risk,
You double down on the risk itself. You're seeing aggressive quantitative funds and high-frequency traders execute a similar macro strategy right now. They are leaning into the volatility, heavily aggressively going long on defense and energy commodities while actively shorting consumer discretionary and travel sectors.
it's a massive wealth transfer. But the broader macroeconomic implications are what have the central banking world sweating. JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon weighed in. offering a very stark warning.
He's looking at the broader inflation narrative.
Right. He noted that while the U.S. consumer and the broader economy have been relatively resilient, the inflation generated by an extended conflict of this scale could be the skunk at a party,
It's a very apt metaphor.
because central banks thought they were done fighting inflation.
Exactly. The U.S. Federal Reserve thought they had largely navigated the post-pandemic inflationary environment. They were eyeing rate normalization. But an exogenous supply-side shock, a spike in crude, a spike in global freight rates due to the Hormuz closure, threatens to undo all of that.
Because if the supply chain breaks down and energy costs soar, that inflation gets imported directly into the domestic economy. Everything from manufacturing components to the diesel required to truck groceries to your local supermarket gets more expensive.
It trickles down to everything.
And President Trump stated publicly that this conflict could last 4 to 5 weeks, or far longer. If we hit that far longer scenario, how trapped is the Fed?
Completely cornered.
Really?
If core inflation begins to reaccelerate aggressively due to this energy and supply chain shock, the Fed cannot cut interest rates to support a softening labor market or a vulnerable commercial real estate sector.
Because cutting rates would just add to the inflation.
Right. They may be forced into a higher-for-longer posture indefinitely to fight the imported inflation. That exerts massive, sustained downward pressure on the broader equity markets and makes debt servicing exponentially more expensive for corporations and consumers alike.
So we're looking at stagflation.
It introduces the very real tail risk of stagflation. Yes,
Yeah.
high inflation, low growth.
Let's take a step back and look at the sheer magnitude of what we've unpacked here today.
It's a lot to process.
It is. We started with the unprecedented tactical reality of a joint U.S.-Israeli campaign decapitating the supreme leadership of Iran and dismantling underground complexes with stealth bombers. We examined the internal chaos, the regime choking its own population with a 1% internet blackout.
While highly sophisticated cyber operations hijack civilian prayer apps to deliver direct military ultimatums.
Exactly. We traced the regional blowback as fractured IRGC units internationalized the battlefield, launching drone swarms into the UAE and Kuwait. We quantified the global economic paralysis as 170 massive container ships sit stranded outside the Strait of Hormuz, igniting the energy markets.
And we track the massive rotation of institutional capital.
Gold-shattering records, Bitcoin failing its safe haven test, and defense contractors surging. So as we close out this deep dive, what is the core underlying theme that listeners should walk away with?
The overarching takeaway from all of this data is that geographical distance is an illusion in the modern era.
How so?
A kinetic event occurring thousands of miles away is intimately and immediately tied to the microeconomics of your daily life. The drone that intercepts a radar system in Oman directly and mathematically alters the price you pay at the gas pump next week.
It's a direct line.
It is. A BGP routing manipulation in Tehran forces cybersecurity posture changes in the banking infrastructure that secures your checking account. The strategic decisions made in underground war rooms today will directly dictate the yield curve, the inflation rate, and ultimately the health of your 401k and retirement portfolio for the next decade.
The interconnectedness is absolute.
The fundamental nature of the battlefield has permanently expanded. It is no longer confined to armies meeting on a defined physical front.
The borders are gone.
When a localized conflict involves manipulating the routing protocols of global telecommunications, hacking consumer software applications to bypass state media, leveraging global commodity choke points to pressure superpowers, and triggering automated algorithmic capital flight in the trading servers of New York and London, the battlefield is literally everywhere.
It's in our pocket.
It's inside our mobile devices, it's deeply embedded in our just-in-time supply chains, and it's actively shaping the value of our currency. The critical question we face in the coming weeks isn't merely who establishes kinetic dominance in the Middle East.
What's the real question?
The real question is whether our hyper-optimized, deeply intertwined global economic and digital system possesses the resilience to survive the compounding shockwaves of this conflict without structurally fracturing.
A sobering and vital framework to keep in mind as this situation continues to evolve. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a rapidly shifting global paradigm. Keep questioning the surface-level narratives, keep examining the deeper mechanics of the systems around you, and as always, stay curious. Until next time.